Welcome to another episode of Esoteric Hollywood, Jay's Analysis. With me today, True Free Thinker. Welcome to another gosh, I do this every time. I have it playing in the background. This is so dumb. You think I would figure this out. But I was, he mentioned get her done. Get her done. And I was on some dumb rap video today. And the rap video was titled something like, let's get it, let's get it, let's get it. And I was like, this is the rap version of get her done. It was spelled like ESKEEEETIT. Let's get it. So welcome, True Free Thinker. We're going to be talking movies. We're going to be talking MKULTRA, Hollywood. He is the proprietor of the website True Free Thinker. And we have a lot of commonalities when it comes to I'm just going to pull it up here. When it comes to Hollywood, MKUltra, pop culture, but you also do a lot of good interactions with the Dawkins type, the new atheists, the cults. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate you and your audience.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, we've kind of been in the background, kind of off and on, conversing here and there, trying to get a chat for a long time. And if you want to, why don't you just kind of start by giving us, truefreethinker.com. Give us kind of an overview of your work, what you do, how you got to where you are, and then we'll kind of do a little synopsis of MKUltra and go from there.
Sure. Would you first make sure that you check YouTube, because I don't see a live stream coming up there?
Sometimes it's a little
delayed. Okay.
Delayed, but yes, you're right. I should check it.
So I think the most important thing is that
we're live.
You might be
It's just a little bit delayed, but yeah, we're live.
Okay, no worries. You might be a redneck if you think GED stands for get her done.
That's appropriate. I'm from Tennessee, so yeah, I hear that kind of stuff all the time. Have you ever been to the Deep South? Have you ever experienced it? It's kind of a trip.
I have not.
It's not all bad. There's some good here, but there's a lot of silliness too. What's sad is that everybody has gotten really, really big. I was at Whole Foods yesterday in Tennessee, and you'll see giant 400 or 500 pound people at Whole Foods just like filling their carts, and you think. I think the thought process is, well, if it's Whole Foods, it's organic. I can eat, but it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
I'm serious. That's what it's like in Tennessee. The Whole Foods in Tennessee is like a trough. Somebody said that this is a feeding trough.
Hey-o. Okay, I got the feeling I better start my little intro to attempt to put some semblance of order in this thing already.
Okay, I'm sorry. Apologize. Go ahead.
No, you're going to get me laughing the whole time. Oof. So I suppose a little background is that so people always get on my case for using the term free thinker, and that's because when I was a child, and I did start life as a child, but you probably already knew that. But it turns out that I was born at a young age, so that kind of would explain that. No, when I don't recall how old, but definitely in single digits, I found out that there was no such thing as what in my country of birth is the ratoncitos, the teeth mice. Like, we didn't have the tooth fairy. We had to knock off the teeth mice. And I distinctly remember when my parents told me that wasn't a real thing. I was so absolutely distraught that I definitely look back upon that time as when I became a skeptic. And I'm referring to a true and honest skeptic, because a lot of people call themselves skeptics when they're really cynics. So I would say that a skeptic says, I will not believe until, but a cynic says, I will not believe, period. Right? So, so looking back, I can see my life as a continuous pursuit for the truth. And Then maybe around 6th grade, I started reading a lot about cryptozoology, UFOs, and witchcraft. Those were my interests. Around junior high school, I guess some people call it middle school, got into the dark side, death metal music, horror movies, everything black. And going forwards, got some interest in the New Age movement, did a stint in the reggae scene, and kind of, very eclectic all over the place.
Have you seen the Andy Samberg skit from Saturday Night Live where he plays the white Rasta guy?
I don't recall that, no.
That's a hilarious skit. You should watch that. There's also a Tim and Eric skit. I'm not saying you're the white reggae guy. I'm just saying it's really funny because he's kind of making fun of the, pop jumping around trying to kind of find an identity.
Right. Yeah, I can definitely understand that. But I could make a very, very, very long story, but I am Jewish, and I eventually came to accept that Jesus is the Messiah, and one of the main driving forces behind that was that the problem of evil drove me to accept that Jesus is the Messiah as the ultimate redeemer.
Interesting.
But yeah, that would probably be a whole different discussion, but that's just to give a background. And
well, did you spend a lot of time on that because that's kind of like a go-to thing for atheism, is just to always kind of harp on that, like, oh, the problem of evil proves us right?
I would say that came afterwards. It was just my own concerns as a Jew, and all the suffering we've been through the millennia. And well, it seemed like if there was no ultimate redeemer, then it was a guarantee that it was all for nothing. And that's just that's not an argument. That's just a succinct one-liner, that the way I could state it, right? And well, I certainly went through the stages of shock in becoming what, I could say Messianic Jew. I could call myself a Christian. I don't have a problem either way. But yeah, beginning with thinking these Christians are just absolutely insane. Who on earth do they think they are to tell me that they can explain what my own scriptures mean? And like I said, the stages of shock, from denial to anger and eventual acceptance. And almost immediately coming to Christianity literally from the outside, knowing virtually nothing about it except what I picked up in the media, which is always negative, I made the tragic error of getting myself involved in Christian apologetics almost right away. And so that's what leads me to doing what I'm doing today, which is my focus lately has been writing books. But as you know, I've done my share of videos and tons of written articles on my website about, well, you name it, theological issues, cultural issues, and everything in between.
Wow, it's a fascinating tale. One question I have is, if you don't mind me asking, did this lead to a lot of family backlash? Did you have friends that were kind of like, get out of here, we're done with you, this is too much?
The friend issue is sort of unique because right around the time I got what I would call saved, somehow the Lord managed to literally take all my friends and move them out of state. I'm telling you, it was like cockroaches. Just maybe 7 of my closest friends moved out of state at once within a few weeks and kind of left me alone. So in a way, I see that as beneficial because I think I needed that time of reflection and purification and what have you. As far as the family, I probably won't say much because I have a very strong sense of filial piety, but yeah, they certainly thought I was nuts.
But
yeah, I mean, at one point, my dad. No, I was just going to say, my dad had asked me at one point if I was going to convert, and I said, "Well, convert to what?" I mean, I believe that the Jewish Messiah came in the person of the Jewish man, God come in the flesh, Jesus, as prophesied in the Jewish scriptures. So what am I converting to exactly? I mean, I'm accepting my Messiah.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, that's kind of one of the kickers for me is that especially on the right, you meet a lot of people who have this very almost Gnostic conception of the Hebrew texts. They're really adamant to oppose it, and they think that this is Jesus was like this revolutionary or something like that. I mean, Jesus is very explicit numerous times that he came to fulfill. It's not a revolutionary destruction process. So, I mean, I understand that. I feel like you have to constantly kind of deal with that misunderstanding. And even in a lot of aspects of Christianity, there's a lot of misunderstanding, I would say, from my vantage point on the meaning of those texts and the importance of those texts and what they describe. And you really can't make sense of the New Testament without, what's in Leviticus, the high priest, all this kind of stuff is very clear, in the book of Hebrews, and the Hebrews really makes no sense if you don't understand the Mosaic law to some degree.
So in fact, one other thing my dad told me is what, you think the rabbis who have been studying the scriptures for millennia, that you think they're wrong? But the fact is, each of us has one lifetime, and we all stand on the shoulders of giants. So, and that's also a styled genetic fallacy, but that's another issue. But one of the books I wrote is called "Is Jesus the Messiah?" and I subtitled it "A Judaism versus Judaism Debate," because the more I looked into the rabbinic writings and what they had to say about the kind of Messiah we should expect, the more I found that, as odd as it seems, I provide tons of evidence in the book, they would tend to side or at least agree that the kind of Messiah Jesus is one of the options for a Messiah. And of course, I say options because there's so many opinions, but he certainly would fit one of the bills. The suffering servant. The Messiah who is struck down. Yeah, and then would accomplish his mission later. Yeah.
Yeah, I've met a couple very adept Messianic Jews who know the Gemara and all the different commentaries, and they make a lot of very fascinating arguments that I think that if we were more aware of those things, might make more sense. But people who are new to Christ, they don't really know that kind of stuff. You go to the bookstore and you buy a Bible or something, and you just start reading it. You kind of gotta. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm still like piecing out a lot of this stuff and putting it together. And it was only a few years ago, as I was mentioning to you, that I was trying to look into old liturgies and how the synagogue liturgy developed and how it kind of influenced early Christianity. And you just aren't really taught a lot of that kind of stuff, the historicity of the liturgy and of these kinds of things, that has a lot of continuity with the law and the prophets. I don't know how else to say it. So yeah, I think that when we do understand that Daniel and Isaiah and these major and minor prophets are talking about somebody who is obviously, I mean, even the Messianic Jewish commentaries, or excuse me, even the rabbinical commentaries will say which texts are believed to be Messianic and which aren't. And it seems to be a whole bunch of different texts that don't really make a lot of sense unless it's the same. How can he be on the one hand,
right,
suffering servant and the inheritor of David's throne?
Right.
It doesn't seem to make sense. So it does seem like you're right that the different levels of debate suggests a more complex figure than just a kind of conquering king or something like that.
Right, and I'll grant you another problem is, well, God bless them, that Judaism, so much like Catholicism, you'll hear the same from Judaism and Catholicism. We have always believed X, and it's well, I'm sorry, that is just not the case, and it's provable. But if you would ask a common Jewish person or a scholar or a rabbi, they would tell you we've always believed, and they would inevitably state something, contextually, about the Messiah, for example. That is just not the case. It is just one of the options that they are pretending is the only authoritative option. And so that's part of what makes it difficult as well, is this reliance on the vague claim of we have always believed X, and if you don't know any better, it's easy to say, oh, well, I guess that must be the case.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to talk about maybe in the future we can.
Yeah, and yes, because this has been fascinating thus far.
Well, you had a great 2 talks I heard a long time ago on Genesis that I really liked, and
Right.
I tend to totally agree with you on Genesis. That's a very contentious topic, but I think just quickly on that, and I'll get your comments, see what you think. The more that I engaged the atheists, the more I engage people that are really committed to this hardcore Darwinian type perspective, the more it seems to me that people in the general sphere don't realize how weak the case actually is. That it's a very grand theory that rests on some very, very sparse evidence that's just kind of like exploded into this assumption that, oh, well, we know that all this stuff is proven and certain. And then when you really dig into it, you spend a few years reading books on creation and on Genesis and this kind of stuff, you start to realize that, man, the philosophy of Darwinism, you realize this is really a flimsy case. They're extrapolating from the fact that a creature has a minor modification in his DNA that doesn't add any new information. It just alters existing information. They're extrapolating. So it must have been the case that all of the, various kinds or species derived from one single protoplasm, which was sexless, by the way. Why do we have 2 genders? So in other words, it's built on a grand narrative. Do you agree? But I heard a guy making this great point, and what is the advantage of the sexless protozoa splitting into 2, which makes it even more difficult to reproduce?
Okay, Jay, you're playing into the gender binary.
James Kelly, a buddy of mine, was on one time, and he said that he was like, "Did you know that some of the early Darwinists said that the original protozoa was sexless?" So that's how they could justify transhumanism evolving us beyond genders, because the original protozoa was genderless. I mean, come on.
You know what? You're about to get me going off on a different topic, because one of the books I wrote is called On the Occult Roots of Post-Genderism, and it's dead set on that topic you just touched, so don't get me started. But I will say this much. Biology is a science. Evolution is a philosophy. Okay, so the problem is that people turn evolution into a Weltanschauung, right? So that it becomes a theory that is supposed to be about biology becomes their world view. And so that's why they end up interpreting all things through a Darwinian lens. And this is why, if you were to discuss something as how many beneficial mutations there might be on average, or is this creature X an actual transitional form, they get so emotive about it. I mean, they take it personally because they don't hear you discussing scientific facts. They hear you touching upon the very core of their worldview.
Yes.
And another aspect of it is Darwinian stories. And I get this a lot. I get people just telling me Darwinian stories, and I have to point out, look, you're not speaking science. You're just weaving a tall tale. I'm asking you for actual evidence. But then, since they're so used to thinking of it in terms of a worldview, then they think that telling a story that sounds vaguely scientific and is based upon the theory, that's what counts as evidence. And so even if you read a peer-reviewed science journal paper, you always need to distinguish in your mind between, okay, what is it that I'm reading that is actual scientific evidence that's verifiable and observable, and what is the interpretation of that evidence that's telling me how to think about that?
Yes, and this is a big area where academia fails people, because in my experience going to the university, and when you're sitting there in your philosophy of science class or when you're in your astronomy class, none of those kinds of distinctions are made. It's just kind of like a top-down pronouncement from Mount Olympus that this is so, it's been proven, it's dogmatic. And nobody generally, 18 to 22 in the classroom questions or asks, wait a minute, what about radical empiricism? You're relying on radical empiricism here. Is that actually a valid philosophy? What about your interpretive bias when it comes to how or why these mutations might just be within that kind and not necessarily from a transmutation of species. That's never ever brought up because they're not used to being questioned in that way. So, but yeah, we can talk Darwin down the road. But I like that you make this the point that I often make. I agree that it's really about interpretive frameworks or paradigms.
Yes.
And it's the same way with any of the atheists. I've tried to make that same argument that I don't believe evidence comes to us uninterpreted. It's not a brute fact. We're going to interpret it through the lens of everything that we've been encultured with, raised with, learned, our parents. All of that goes into framing our worldview. That doesn't mean that it's necessarily relativistic or wrong. It's just a fact of how we are as humans. So
I'll give you an example. I live a mile above sea level, and we went to the peak of a mountain over here. We're walking across the top of the mountain, and I found a fossilized clam. Okay. From the time it took me to bend down and pick it up and stand back up, somebody said that's millions of years old. Now, the issue for me at this moment is not to discuss the age of the Earth, but the fact that I thought, wow, I just stood up and the test results already came back. I mean, so that just shows you that we could both see the evidence. It's a fossilized clam, but somebody instantaneously brought an interpretation to what they were looking at. Right? So anyhow.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, and we don't realize how instantaneous it is. Like our mind works that way. We think it's all rational process and analysis, and it's not. I mean, I can't, and I'm not being arrogant, but I can't tell you how many professors that were teaching, say, philosophy of science or astronomy classes that come to mind where, and at the time when I was 22, I had studied quite a bit of apologetics, so I did have some facility with dealing with these kinds of views. And I remember one of them was astronomy professor. He was the head of the astronomy department, and he was talking about empiricism. He says, look, the only way to know anything is just by empirical observation. There's no other access to knowledge that we have. And to believe in anything beyond sense data is impossible, superstitious, and ridiculous. And that's very easy to refute. But he had never been asked, and he said this, he had never been asked, how do you justify that assumption itself? Because it's not something that you know
without your senses, right?
Yeah, you don't know that from sense data alone. And he sat there and he said, he said, I'm gonna have to get a piece of chalk and draw this out. So he wrote the sentence on the chalkboard, and he looked at it. And he said, I don't know. This sounds like a word game. That's always where it goes back to. That sounds like a word game.
Yeah, I get a lot of that too from people who can't answer questions. They'll make that kind of a statement. Yeah, that's common.
We will. Let's. I keep getting this extra stream popping up here. Let me exit that out. Okay, so we're gonna talk film and MKUltra today. It's not a theology philosophy day. We could get into some of that in the future, but you brought up a great movie. I think it's pretty good for a kind of indie movie that I had not seen in a long time. I saw it when it came out, and I totally forgot this movie, Banshee Chapter. Yeah. And this is a kind of it's a 2013 indie found footage type film where we have the integration of MKUltra, LSD, drug culture, the promotion of drug culture, and all that kind of stuff actually touched on in the film through this stand-in character for Hunter S. Thompson. And you mentioned a kind of also William S. Burroughs mix, which is a great point because I didn't think about that. I like that this film actually goes beyond just government conspiracy and actually touches on the spiritual realm, something, kind of edging on the demonic and that being related to drug culture. You don't see that a lot in films. It's almost always kept at the level of the here and the now. But actually, Tim Leary, one of the famous MKUltra doctors, he wrote a book about tripping and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. So he very clearly saw it as connected to not just something that you do for fun, recreation. But because he saw himself continuing in the footsteps of Crowley, as he says,
Yes.
that it's a kind of ritual working where you're, you know, opening up gateways in the mind, other paths of consciousness, other levels of reality, planes of existence, and that you're accessing these kinds of entities. And that's actually touched on in the film. So we can go into that, or do you want me? I could give a little brief background on MKUltra. I don't want to talk too much, though. I have a tendency to
Well, no, let me just point out one point about the movie, and then you can give the background. If you recall, the movie is very upfront about that it's the CIA conducting these experiments, and what they're doing is they are removing DMT from corpses and injecting it into live subjects of experiments. Okay, and now
right. I do have notes. I've got my notes on that. Yeah, it is specifically said MKUltra at the beginning, although they're a little bit wrong because they say it starts in 1963. Actually, it goes back to the 40s and 50s, but
right.
Minor details.
And incidentally, I don't know if this means anything, but that movie was the first one to be released on the virtual reality headset Oculus Rift.
Wow, really?
I don't know if that means anything, but a movie about mind control.
Yeah, I mean,
demonism being the first one that you could do a low-tech version of plugging into your brain. That's pretty interesting.
No, I think you're spot on, because actually not many people realize the connection to DARPA and the tech stuff that directly comes out of MKUltra. People aren't aware that that is actually out of MKUltra, and you can verify that. And I was going to mention that later on here in our discussion, because I think around the time that this movie came out, I was aware of MKUltra and I'd read some mainstream stuff and watched some documentaries. But what's neat about the internet, of course, is that over time we actually can put more of the puzzle pieces together, because, you know, the official story is Richard Helms destroyed 7 boxes of the total 14 boxes of files related to what was actually going on. So supposedly we don't know. That could be legends and tales. I don't know. But, you know, you've got John Marx's book. You got Walter Bowert's book. There are a couple other books that kind of touch on it, but there's not a lot of source material really, other than some of the public documents. So I think the best way that I've found lately in the last couple of years to really delve into this, and this will be in a significant section of Esoteric Hollywood too, is to look at the doctors themselves and what they wrote. And so when I found that John C. Lilly book, Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer, I was like, holy crap, here's a first example of one of these guys actually saying, yes, I did do this on children. I did actually wipe people's brain. I did use triggers and key codes, because before I'd only seen that kind of bantered around, you know, like, well, maybe that's true. You know what I mean? But then when you look at Gregory Bateson, another one of these guys, and he has a publication on cybernetics. So he has this big long essay that he did. If I recall, it's a big long essay. It's probably in some book somewhere. But Bateson deals with cybernetics, and John Marx in the last chapter of his books talks about it going from bio warfare and into tech, and that's why Jose Delgado and these different lunatics were putting the chips in animals' brains and monkey brains, and you can watch those videos on YouTube. You still see him. You know, he's got like a RC remote control steering bulls and stuff. But anyway, so yes, we'll kind of get into the dissecting the movie. But what do you think about that? You think looking at the actual doctors' books themselves is a good way to do this? What do you think?
Right, in as much as they might be open enough to reveal what they were interested in and what they were doing, certainly. Because it is a matter of piecing together the bits and pieces we can get our hands on. So I wanted to point out that this whole process really is about discovery and manipulation. So let me give you an example of a friend of mine who suffered back pain, terrible back pain for years. And one day she says, "Oh, there's years of my life that I can't remember." And I thought, okay, I know exactly what you're talking about, because the fact is that we have built into us a mechanism whereby the brain or the mind would build amnesia walls around trauma, because this is a way you can get on with your life without being constantly bombarded by terrible memories, right? So that's why I understood why she said that. There's years
Yes.
of her life she couldn't remember due to this horrible pain, and this is why what used to be called shell shock and is now post-traumatic stress disorder. It's considered a disorder because the brain has malfunction and fails to build these walls, and these people are just constantly tormented by trauma, and they find it really hard to keep living a normal life. This is also why a woman, after giving birth, she'll say, "I'm never going to do that again." But within weeks or months, she'll say, "I want another baby," because she has put all that traumatic experience and the pain behind her. So this is just a normal, natural process. And what the experiments were about was uncovering this, but then manipulating it. Would you say so?
Yeah. It's funny you said that, because maybe 4 years ago, 3 years ago, I had a date with an Asian girl who was very attractive. I think she was Korean, and she worked in finance, and she starts telling me this crazy story about that she had been through a traumatic situation where a guy robbed her in a taxi in Chicago. And I was kind of digging deeper into the MKULTRA stuff at this time, 2014 or so. And she's like, "Oh yeah, I have a significant portion of my life that I don't remember." And I'm like, "What?"
Wow.
And she's like, "Yeah, I went through a very advanced kind of experimental operation where the doctors removed a section of my brain that dealt with memories of this trauma." And I was like, "Why would you do that?" That's insane. She said, "Well, I thought at the time it would be a good thing. And, I was having nightmares. I couldn't sleep because of being robbed in this taxi cab. So to me, it sounded good." And I was like, "Well, it sounds to me like it was just like they were using you as a kind of a guinea pig." And she said, "Well, they may have, she did seem a little kind of on edge after all this, but yeah, I think these kinds of I've heard of another person, in other words, give that kind of testimony."
Yeah, and that's right on topic, because that's one thing that happened in the TV show Fringe. Walter had part of his brain removed to keep him from remembering certain things, and of course he was involved in these MKL. Yeah,
I have forgot about Fringe, and I think the same thing happens to something similar happens to Jennifer Garner in Alias. She can't remember when she's a kid a certain section of her life, and then later in the series she finds out that her dad had put her in this special CIA mind control program, for most of her life, and she doesn't recover the memories until much later.
So I see you're holding a book there. If you want to say something, if not, maybe it's a good time to explain why we would be discussing movies and TV shows that are fictional.
Yeah, real quick, I was just going to read that quote from, and I've read it before. I think I put it in a couple articles, or an article that I did, and this is from John C. Lilly, one of the MKULTRA doctors. He's known for his weird flipper stuff, dolphin stuff. But this is his book, and this is a real book. And I was even skeptical myself. I know all this conspiracy stuff, and I was skeptical a couple of years ago. And here he is saying, this is on page 18 and 19. He's got a list of techniques, projection display techniques for deep self-analysis with LSD. And he's talking about using different types of images, almost like Alex in Clockwork Orange, when he's strapped down. And he said, Lilly says, you can replay images of faces, show mirrors to them. And it says, following the description of all these examples of the successful use, the results of with the freedom to program new instructions during the LSD state, it is to be emphasized for those that have not seen this phenomenon within themselves that this kind of manipulation and control of one's programs, you're talking about mind programs, is rather dramatic. Is a rather dramatic presentation to oneself, apparently not achievable outside of LSD. So he's saying you can't really do this without this kind of super strong drug. And then he goes on to say, by means of the use of the mirror, careful inspection of the body, of the external reality, it is possible to induce a special state of consciousness in which remembered or unconsciously stored images of the self or of others appear on or in place of one's own face. So he's saying you can program a person to see themselves as somebody else. Pretty crazy. Anyway, it goes on to say that you can really mess people up with melting the image of their face that they're seeing, and that this really messes up people's self-perception. And then it goes on to, if you saw that movie Faces in the Crowd, the Mila Jovovich movie, where she has something, she hits her head and she can't, it's something like dysphagia or something. There's a disorder where you can't see faces. He goes on to say that can be induced. You can induce the inability to see people's faces through all. I mean, so he's just like literally doing crazy mind control experiences or experiments. Then he goes on to talk about how everybody who he does this to experiences apparitions, demons, spirits, and entities from beyond, and he can't explain that. He doesn't know what they're tapping into, but it seems to match up with all the pagan religions, he says. So here's the MKUltra doctor saying everything that is presented in Banshee chapter. So I'll give you my statement as to why. Real quick, I'll say too, what this is what is all this stuff? MKUltra, this is programs started under the aegis of the military back in the 40s and 50s, basically to master the mental domain, to master controlling people's mind, not just in the sense of sending an assassin into some war-torn area or to kill some political candidate, but ultimately, I believe to do this on a mass scale, you know, and then the way that Tim Leary talks about it is that it's that way. It's not just the individual's ritual seeking or trying to be a shaman or something like that. From the government standpoint, it's about altering culture. And that's why they put it out into pop culture. That's why LSD was handed out at Altamont, these different concerts, Haight-Ashbury, Laurel Canyon, as I'll be discussing in the book. Actually, a lot of Hollywood A-listers in the 50s, prior to the hippie, prior to Laurel Canyon, they were tripping acid all the time. People like Cary Grant in the 50s, they were bombed out of their minds on LSD. So that's what we're dealing with here, is a kind of government study, private companies studying, researching, different think tanks to master what kind of began as psychological warfare in the military setting, but then kind of moved into mass control, I would say. What do you think?
Yeah, certainly. That is the, well, it could be termed many different things, such as the weaponization of the mind and therefore the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how or why we would be going from real life experiments such as MKUltra into discussing what is supposed to be fiction. So the fact is that TV shows and movies, they don't just happen ex nihilo, right? I mean, they are conceived of, they are scripted, they are edited, they are discussed, they are funded, until what ends up on your screen is something that is very carefully regulated. Every single thing you see on your screen is there for a reason and a purpose. Doesn't mean that there's any kind of deeper hidden purpose behind it, but it is a set. Somebody put it there.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue of who put it there or why, or what message is being conveyed, I would say that's a little more difficult, because you don't know ultimately if it was the movie's funder or the studio or the director or the set designer. So, you know, there's a issue with people like us discussing this, where we would like, and people would like us to provide silver bullets, and that's very, very difficult. I can tell you this much. If you recall that at the beginning of each of her shows, Carol Burnett would pull on her ear, right? You recall that?
She would do what now?
She would tug her ear.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
I hadn't thought
And
about
she said, Yeah. And she says, well, that was a message to my grandmother of me telling her I love her. Okay.
Okay.
Now, if she had not revealed that,
Hmm.
maybe nobody would have noticed it or would have thought, oh, that's weird. She has some kind of tick, you know. But the fact is, she was sending that message across to the entire nation watching her show, and nobody knew what it meant until she revealed it. So I guess the issue is if Carol Burnett can do it, why can't anybody else?
Oh, well,
Right?
if you study the work of Jordan Maxwell, you'll learn that tugging of the ear to a grandmother, grand high witch, mother, dark mother of the Illuminati, that's clearly what she's signaling. So your misconstrual is clearly not correct. No, I
Oh,
think that's a good point, what you just
did you
said,
get that
because
from the notes in the Geneva Bible? Or sorry.
that's a good point. Yeah, because symbols, this is a big mistake people make. And so every now and then people will ask me, what do you think about Jordan Maxwell? I mean, as a funny kind of thing, he's funny, but no, the word. Oh, here's a good one. I used to get arguments of people saying, sometimes it was Masons actually, and they would say, Solomon is, you can't ever reference the temple or the writings of Solomon because that's Masonic. And I said, what are you talking about? Why would you think that's Masonic? It predates Masonry. Oh, well, because the word Solomon is Sol Om On.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, no, wait a minute. This has nothing to do with those are languages that don't relate to the Hebrew name Solomon. That's nothing.
Yeah.
That's way later. So you see this kind of thing in conspiracy stuff a lot, which is a big pet peeve.
Yeah. His name was Shlomo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So anyhow, that is why we
soul sun worship, the of the Buddhist monks, and then on Egyptian, deity, phallic deity, or whatever on is supposed to be.
So I find that we're living in an interesting crossover time, because perhaps you could say that the older movies that delved into issues such as mind control, prime example, of course, Manchurian Candidate, perhaps those movies were meant to uncover something that was known to very few, and it was kind of insider stuff, and you would certainly never hear about it unless you somehow got yourself into that research.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're living in a day where you see something like that in a movie, and it's a lot more difficult to know why it's there. I mean, maybe somebody late at night was trolling the internet and ran across it and thought it'd be cool to put it in a movie. Or, for example, Alex Jones talked about how he consulted on a glass darkly, and he told him to purposefully put in some symbolism. So maybe it's just a marketing thing. And again, that's something I don't pretend to be able to decipher, but we can just certainly point things out when we see them. And there actually are some a few examples that I wanted to offer that go in a few different directions that tie together, if I may.
Sure. Yeah. I'll tell you what, if you would go ahead and speak, I've got to use the restroom really quick, but I don't want to stop the stream. So I will be listening.
Just make sure you turn off. Yeah, don't take your microphone in there, please.
No, it's here. No problem. But I will be listening. So yes, please do make your point there, and I'll be right back.
Sure. Okay, so an overall theme that I notice in a lot of movies is what I end up calling alchemical Hollywood, right? So Jay Dyer has esoteric Hollywood. William Ramsey has occult Hollywood. Well, I got alchemical Hollywood. And so the concept that I notice in many movies is that a person will go through a trauma, and that will ultimately lead to the emergence of a brand new personality. So for instance, undergoing a trauma and ended up becoming a person who is hardened by it, which is portrayed in a good light. So for instance, a person becomes braver in the end, or whatever it might be. And of course, it's always written in the manner whereby it's considered beneficial in the end, because everybody loves a happy ending. But nevertheless, The point is that, very much like the MKUltra experiments, the premise is to undergo trauma in order to change the personality, and this is really just ancient alchemy. And it's pretty commonly known that mystical alchemy became scientific chemistry.
Yes.
And I'm saying all that because I'll give you an example from the TV show Breaking Bad. Okay, that's a perfect example for me because it is a show about mystical alchemy that is disguised as a show about scientific chemistry. And so, for instance, well, I think it's the very first episode when Walter White is shown to be a chemistry teacher, and he talks about it's all about solution and dissolution, which is just typical chemistry, but it's also typical alchemy, as you would notice. You would notice on the arms of Baphomet, like solva and cogula, same thing, solution, dissolution, and the transformation of the person into a new personality. And there's also, if you remember the older 80s movies, The Game.
Yes, the Michael Douglas, yes.
Right, so there was an entire scenario that was meant to transform him. And so he constantly undergoes all kinds of traumas throughout that movie to have this new personality come forth. A more recent movie called 13 Sins is exactly the same kind of idea.
Yes, there was also, I don't recommend this movie because it ended up being really brutal, just violent, but Kill List, that was an independent, I think, Irish film, and the whole I'm just going to spoil it right away, but in Kill List, the plot was the hired assassin who's kind of hardened and doesn't have any care or concern, but he does still have a family somehow. He's on his last job, and then he ends up being initiated into this pretty elite cult, British Royals type cult, and his final job ended up being that he unknowingly killed his son. So that was kind of the final test of being, initiated. He kind of didn't want to be initiated at the end. He was trying to get out of it, and he thought that the only way out was to kill whoever was in his way, and ended up being his son. So there you have a kind of human sacrifice type theme there. But the whole movie was about his own process of being soulless, callous, and then the final breaking point was killing his son.
I've not watched that one, but yeah, I could definitely see how it's the same kind of concept. It's the alchemical from the mystical side to I hear you. And I appreciate you saying that. Actually, let me give you there's a movie called The Fear of Darkness. That's by directed Christopher Fitchett, and it is same kind of thing as the Banshee chapter in as far as DMT usage and leading to dissociative identity disorder. It's very, very plain in the movie that's the premise of it.
Now,
go ahead.
Well, this is a great point because a lot of people, and we'll talk about this when it comes to the promotion of the drug culture, which I had a drug phase when I was younger, and I had bad LSD experiences. I don't recommend it. And then as you get older and you realize this is engineered, this is not put out there for you to have freedom and fun. It's not even put out there for your individual, enlightenment or whatever. There's no shortcut to enlightenment. It's not good stuff. And people don't realize that it is connected to spiritual stuff. That's what's crucial. I mean, I had bad spiritual experiences on LSD. I don't recommend it for anybody. Now you don't have to take my word for it. I'm sure that people are gonna, every time I talk about LSD, people are like, "Oh, you're just a wuss. You couldn't handle your trip." No, I had multiple trips. They weren't all bad, which that just shows my idiocy to keep doing it after having a really bad trip the first time. But even in Banshee chapter, it comes up that the Hunter S. Thompson type character, it's sort of subtly hinted at that he's part of this counterculture movement to promote the drugs, and it doesn't say he's like CIA or something, but you're kind of wondering because throughout the movie, it's like they're like, "How do you have the government formula for this?" And he's like, "Oh, I got a friend. It's like, well, again, how do you have the secret government formula to this unless, maybe you're, I don't know. Now, does that suggesting Hunter S. Thompson was a bad guy? I don't know. There's, a lot of questions about his death. Maybe, he talked about 9/11 right before he died. I don't know. But I do think you're on the right track here to point out that the drug culture is totally manipulated. We've been talking about that for a long time, but it's not just bad. It's spiritually bad.
Yes, and when you hear the old-time hippies talking about drugs, they often will say that young people really need to know what they're doing with them, because young people tend to look at them as a way of getting high, whereas they saw them as a way to reach spiritual enlightenment. I mean,
Yeah.
Americans love a shortcut. So do you want to live in a Buddhist temple and meditate for a decade before you can leave your body, or do you want to just take some acid and trip out and tell yourself that you're spiritual? You know what I mean?
Yes, and then when you read a lot of critiques of like Buddhist thought, Father Seraphim Rose has a critique of New Age religions and Buddhism and Hinduism and the meditation techniques, and he talks about the astral projection techniques, and they do match up with the drug process. I mean, I had a more or less out of body experience, the bad trip that I had, and yes, it is, and that's what the monks try to do. If you watch. I just watched Golden Child the other day, and Eddie Murphy was doing his he does this a lot, this Eddie Murphy thing, and I was thinking, actually, Golden Child, as silly as it is, the plot of Golden Child is human trafficking, and that this Tibetan Buddhism stuff isn't just about individual enlightenment, but it's about like finding the gods, and I didn't realize that until few years ago. I'd watched Golden Child again, and I watched a bunch of documentaries afterwards about Tibetan Buddhism, and then you realize, oh, Tibetan Buddhism is meditate, go to the astral plane, interact with the gods, and get enlightenment, right? So it's not just regular Buddhism of let me meld my consciousness into the absolute and become nothingness. This is like left-hand path, go to the astral realm, submit to the demons, you know what I mean?
Yeah, we'll definitely have to rewatch that, but it does go to show that there's deeper levels to be seen, even in a movie that's supposed to be comedy.
Yeah,
I can give you an example right on that.
Like they're doing these occult rituals, and the guy who's behind it is a sorcerer, but they're doing actually satanic rituals, which is interesting because they talk about it as if satanic cults involved in human trafficking, and they're connected to cults, very prominent in the film, triads, this kind of stuff. So kind of if you remember Big Trouble in Little China, which also has the theme of cults, occult, even being as silly as it is, and human trafficking, there's a lot of similarities between Golden Child and Big Trouble in Little China.
So yeah, right in that context about watching borderline comedy movie and recognizing all these dark elements in it, let me point out something. I was watching John Candy's movie Beach House, and they just in passing between scenes, they show a scene of the beach, and instead of like some kid having built a sandcastle, it was pyramids. Okay, now, I'm not the type to go, oh, Illuminati pyramid. First of all, because I don't even know what that means. But I did make a little note in the back of my mind. Okay, that's peculiar because it's unusual, and somebody obviously
Babylonian
did it on purpose.
bimbos and banshees. You have to call Mark Dyson to tell us what the pyramids mean.
Yeah. So, but I'm just saying that wasn't a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Then I watched the John Candy movie Delirious, and now in this one he plays a writer for a soap opera called Beyond Our Dreams. And he ends up in an alternate reality where he can control people through what he types out on his typewriter. So as he's writing the script, people in that reality are actually forced to do what he is having them do, right? Because he is the writer of this reality. And then another other thing I mentioned in that movie is they kept repeating that on the TV, channel 2 and channel 7 are not working. They're just displaying, these black lines. And I don't know if that means anything, but I thought, okay, 2 and 7. Why do they keep mentioning 2 and 7? And of course, there's the Club 27 issue. And the only thing I could really make of it is maybe it's a numerological thing where 2 and 7 reduced to 9. And in occult numerology, when you add the numbers, you're supposed to derive some meaning. And 9, of course, can be viewed as the number of the beast because 6 plus 6 plus 6 is 18, and 1 plus 8 is 9. So I don't know if that means anything. That just to take us to a really odd statement that John Candy's character made in Home Alone, of all things. Okay, so the discussion goes like this. Kay, the mom in that movie, she says, "I'm a bad parent." And the John Candy character, who's playing a polka musician named Gus, he says, "These things happen. Want to talk about bad parents? Look at us. On the road, 48, 49 weeks out of the year. We hardly see our family. Joe forgets his kids' names half the time. Ziggy over there never met his kid. Eddie, let's hope none of them write a book about him." And Kay says, "Tell me, have you ever gone on vacation and left your child home?" And Gus says, "No, but I did leave one in a funeral parlor once. My distraught wife and I left him there all day long with the corpse. He was okay after 6, 7 weeks. He came around, started talking again, but he's okay. Kids get over it. Kids are resilient like that." And Kay says, "Maybe we shouldn't talk about this." And Gus says, "You brought it up." And Kay says, "I'm sorry." So, I mean, that is a pretty hardcore thing to say in a comedy movie, a family movie, about leaving a kid overnight with a corpse that he's so traumatized. He can't even speak for a while, So who knows if any of this means anything? But it's just stuff I've noticed, even in silly comedy movies.
Well, let's make this even crazier when it comes to John Candy. So there's an obscure 80s comedy that I was not aware of until a couple of years ago. A friend recommended, a movie buff friend said, "Hey, you got to watch Volunteers." And I'm thinking, Volunteers? What is so? Tom Hanks and John Candy volunteered to go to Vietnam under the cover of Red Cross or Amnesty International, something like this, right? So it turns out they get there, and the whole mission for what they're supposed to do is a CIA cover. Now, John Candy gets kidnapped, and I think it's Laos or somewhere like that. Anyway, maybe Cambodia. I can't remember exactly, but he gets kidnapped and taken from Vietnam to like Cambodia or something, and he gets put under these commies, and he gets MKUltra. He gets brainwashed, and they kind of put this alternate John Candy in his head, and he comes back to the camp where Tom Hanks and the CIA and everybody are, and he's trying to undermine everything that they're doing because he underwent the mind control. Anyway, it turns out the whole thing is a scam. The East-West dialectic is fake in the film, and the CIA has a deal with the drug dealers for the Golden Triangle drug deals to run the drugs. So here you are. I mean, I had no idea that's what this movie was about, but go watch it. Volunteers. All of that is laid out perfectly for you, and it's just like I was watching. What's the Lethal Weapon? If you recall, Lethal Weapon 1 has Mel Gibson. I have to give credit to a friend of mine, Nathaniel. He pointed this out. Lethal Weapon 1 has the Mel Gibson character mentioning the Phoenix program. So it had been, many years since I watched Lethal Weapon, and he had this kind of goofy 90s action comedy. And I didn't remember the plot. And well, it turns out that the reason he's called Mad Dog, or that's his nickname or something, is right, because he was in the Phoenix program. Well, the Phoenix program was the CIA program to create the kind of serial killer Apocalypse Now, Colonel Kurtz type characters to terrorize Viet Cong and whatnot. And so, Dave McGowan and different people think that that's where serial killers come from. That's his theory. Well, turns out that I was in the Shane Black plot to Lethal Weapon. And I was like, I had no idea this was going on. So the whole plot is that the Mel Gibson character knows what the bad guys are up to because they're drug running, because it's a version of Iran-Contra. He's like, oh, I can tell by their demolitions, they're CIA, and this is about Iran-Contra. And so I went back and I watched it, and I was like, man, all of these movies are, even this goofy comedy, even Volunteers from the two comedies, action comedies from the 80s, are laying out the whole thing.
Right, and it's sometimes it can be as much as maybe a one-liner in a movie that, oh, for example, did you get a chance to watch that little anti-human video?
Not yet, no.
Yeah, okay, the movie's called Anti-Human, and it mentions MKUltra by name. The thing is, you cannot even guess that that's what the movie is about until about an hour and 17 minutes into the movie.
Oh, wow. Okay. I mean, I'm making notes here of everything.
Yeah, where it's, okay, that's what that's all about. And you finally, but again, it's not touched upon very heavily. I made a less than 2-minute video just to show the 2 clips where relevant information is provided. But
yeah,
I did want to read, yeah.
Yeah, I'll link your video, but go ahead.
Have you heard of the Keanu Reeves movie, Man of Tai Chi?
I have not.
Okay, you know, it's another example of this. Overall, it's just an action movie, you know, martial arts. But here's one speech that the Keanu Reeves character gives. Basically, he's in charge of an underground fighting club that's broadcast illegally around the world, okay? So this is what he says. And now it's time. You've watched him. You've followed him. Tiger Chen, man of Tai Chi, journey into darkness. And this is the discussion he has with the man named Tiger Chen. How did you like it? Anybody can watch a fight, Tiger. But to watch a person's life evolve and change, that is what I offer. This was never about fighting. This was about you, your life. And Tiger says, why? Why me? And the Keanu character says, because we want to see the loss of innocence. We want to see a pure-hearted, good-natured man of Tai Chi become a killer. And when Tiger says no, the reply is yes, kill or be killed, Tiger. That is what they want. That is what I want. Let the show begin.
Next time you have
clear statement. Yes.
Yeah, you have to read that in the Keanu voice next time. Whoa. Because we want.
You know what? Yeah. Before we end, I'm gonna ask you to do me a favor because I unfortunately I don't do impersonations. But anyhow, let's just move on. Another good example of this was the jacket.
Yes, that's a good one too. Adrian Brody, Keira Knightley. And by the way, I want to say a lot of people in the chat are mentioning tons of movies. We got a pretty good live audience. I think we've gotten up to 200. Which is good on the fly here. Yeah, the jacket, and I'll let you talk on that. There's also chatters out there. Yes, we will be covering Jacob's Ladder in my book. That is a great one. Butterfly Effect is a good one too, because that actually deals with abuse. And I do have an analysis of Big Trouble in Little China, kind of older analysis that you can find at Jay's Analysis, just to kind of catch up to people in the chat. And do you have, are you cool with taking questions, or do you not have time for that? Or are we limited on time?
Sure,
How do you feel?
We can take questions. And for all the chatters, I would like to say thank you, because as Jay just mentioned, it was somebody making him privy to the subplot, I guess, of Lethal Weapon that made him realize what it was really about. And it does take all these minds coming together and giving each other tips and clues and hints. That is so very helpful in the kind of discussion and research that we're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, people every day, you know, it's almost hard to keep up with the messages, and they're saying, read this, do this, watch this. And I try. I've got like a giant list of things to get to, but it does work. I do try to get to everything. So I will be covering those movies. And to the people in the chat, if you want to do a super chat, that'll help us out. You don't have to give a whole bunch of money. I'm not asking for tons of money, but I will read the questions as we come into the closing section of this interview. that are super chats. So feel free to do a super chat if you enjoy what we're doing. You want to support the work. If you want to support True Free Thinker, I always split super chats with the guests. So if you enjoy this content, feel free to send us a super chat. So one thing I wanted to mention that was neat about a couple things in my notes here on Banshee chapter before we close on that movie was they're extracting it from people's brains, which made me think of adrenochrome, which, I mean, I know it's not adrenochrome in the movie, but there's one of these rumors that floats around about the elite and the occult idea of extracting adrenochrome, and that this gives a special high, and this is why people like to torture people, and this may be the origin of vampirism. And I don't know about all that yet, but you know, it was only within the last year that I verified, you know, the John C. Lilly trigger code stuff as being real. So I wouldn't be surprised if the adrenochrome stuff wasn't real. And this movie kind of hints at that. It's not adrenochrome, but it's the elite, you know, extracting from the pineal gland people's freaking essences. The number stations, this is another fascinating aspect of that movie. They go to she's tracking down this code that's part of the narrative, and she ends up at a number station where there's a guy that used to be at the NSA who's helping her crack this code. And he's like, oh yeah, the CIA or NSA during Cold War was created to set up these number stations, and the number stations are still kind of mysterious. We don't exactly know what they're up to. That's part of the point. They broadcast these weird songs and codes, and I think generally the assumption is that, well, people who are doing covert operations, they know at a certain time to tune in to the channel, and whatever they hear, the clicking, the beeping, the song, the whatever, it's a version of a cryptogram where they can decode, you know, what this message is. So that's probably what it is. They're still going on. People today, you know, try to decode this stuff. I thought that was interesting that they included that in the film, though. So whoever is behind this movie, you know, they kind of know what they're talking about. You know, they've got some pretty esoteric stuff in there. And there's an interesting movie. Obviously, it's Hollywood fiction, but Number Station with John Cusack has him playing the character of a hitman who's having to deal with the codes and number stations. So anyway, it's not that great of a movie, but it does touch on this. They interact with demons. So that's what these entities are. Messes everybody up. Paperclip comes up. They're researching Operation Paperclip. They mention alchemy, and I can't even read my notes. Oh, the Banshee chapter reminded me of Stranger Things, because what happens is the drug taking seems to kind of open up portals in the minds of the people taking it, and they're the ones experiencing the kind of the demonic activity. And you made a note in your analysis about 11, the person who's being experimented on and being number 11 or something like that, and you made the connection to 9/11, which I think is accurate. And then in Stranger Things, the main character is 11.
Well, yeah,
exactly. And of course, Stranger Things explicitly mentions MKULTRA as well. Abuse, the same kind of stuff. You know, you have the character that's almost just like Dr. Ewan Cameron or John C. Lilly, who's the
tie to the form of demonism as well is in there.
The angle that nobody gets is that how could you connect any of this to demonism? And I'm saying many ways. First of all, I don't advocate Carlos Castaneda, but I remember a few years ago when I was first starting to look at this, I read Carlos Castaneda books, and he's talking about the whole onus of his research is to connect this to other planes of existence. Huxley himself thought that they were tapping into spirits and entities. Timothy Leary thought they were tapping into spirits and entities. So this is not far off. This is pretty prevalent in the doctors who write on the literature, right? John C. Lilly talks about the gods and the spirits.
Right. This is science as magic and magic as science.
Yes.
In fact, last night I was watching Black Tower. You seen that? Based on the Stephen King.
Oh, Dark Tower?
Yes.
Yes, I'm sorry. I was thinking Black Tower. I have seen
Oh, Black Tower. Yeah, Black Tower.
The Stephen King is Dark Tower.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah,
maybe I just
because
wrote it wrong.
I've
Dark
not
Tower.
read. I didn't see the movie because I heard it got bad reviews, but I did read the book, and that book is, dude, it's like.
Well, what I got from
hardcore.
it is the premise is basically a version of siphoning energy from children and
Mhm.
using it to open a portal for the entry of demons.
Yes, the tower is this thing that's on the esoteric spiritual plane, and it kind of has rotating doorways by which spirits, entities, people from other realities step into the consciousness of other
Number
people.
stations.
Well, if you watch or if you read, I've only read the first two Dark Tower books. When you read the second one, there's this druggy dude that everybody thinks is possessed, but it's actually Roland. I think the Roland character, the main guy from part one, he's stepping into this guy's consciousness into our world. So Roland is from like a alternate reality where it's like the Wild West meets Lord of the Rings or something. But he steps into our reality, into like the 80s, into the consciousness of a druggie, who people think is possessed, but it's actually just this guy stepping through from another reality. But I read somewhere that Stephen King has some kind of like Rosicrucian esoteric influence, and I think if you read those books, yeah, it's pretty clear he's got something like that going on.
Yeah, well, what I found fascinating, I'll grant you, I did not read the book Lawnmower Man, but with reference to the movie, I found it fascinating that within the movie, there's a man who suffers from some kind of mental disabilities, and so the doctor is attempting to help him by having him enter a virtual reality space. All right, so when the character is first becoming fully integrated into the virtual reality, all these sigils are flashed on the screen. I mean, magical sigils you would find in any occult book. And I'm thinking, what on earth does high tech have to do with occultism? But that's the point. And then the character ends up becoming so fully integrated into the virtual realm that he ends up saying, I am God here. And then when the doctor tries to pull him out of it, he literally crucifies the doctor. I mean, literally, in the virtual space. And so you have this constant interaction of theology, occultism, and high tech for some reason.
Well, that can give you two books right here that do that very thing. This was very popular in the 90s, Tad Williams's Otherland. And this is all about virtual realities being constructed on the basis of African animistic shamanic trips. So the trips that the shaman would take, this is connected in Tad Williams's Otherland to virtual reality. So the idea is that maybe we can map virtual reality in the way that we can map the human mind. And this is actually what the Brain Initiative, the Salk Brain Initiative that Obama put billions of dollars into, is about mapping the human mind. And that's to create these human computer interfaces, basically, at least as best as I can understand it. And that's actually what Real Player One was about, the new Spielberg film. Another one is Neil Stephenson's Cryptonomicon, which also deals directly with sigils, pathways, virtual reality, and the occult, and how it comes out of like cryptography and this kind of stuff.
So another movie that is very, very obvious, and I knew that the second I saw the title, is American Ultra, of course.
Yes.
That movie is very straight. They're just, I mean, you don't have to guess, wonder, or read between lines. It's very blunt about what it's all about.
Yeah, it is. I remember doing an analysis. I remember going to see it, and I was just like, man, it's like, and this kind of dresses it up like cool, hip type of thing. Oh, put yourself through. It's like if the government creates its own shamanic ritual is what's going on here. Everybody being given drugs, everybody being given these hardcore hallucinogens, and that you go through this process is not, the government's not doing that because they like you or care about you. You're part of it. You're a giant lab rat is what you are, right? I mean, there's a great book World as Laboratory that I mentioned many times. I have to give thanks to Chris for recommending this. Rebecca Limaugh's book, World as Laboratory, shows this mindset that they view the world as a giant, test tube.
And in fact, the common theme that I'm seeing, especially coming forth from transhumanism by any other name, is deconstruction. So the deconstruction of the created realm, the created reality, into a reconstruction made in our own image. And that's why
great work, kind of like
right. You have the deconstruction of philosophy and truth itself and ethics to the point where now we're deconstructing ourselves in our desperation to rebel. We're literally deconstructing gender, which is the premise upon which a human being is based. We're deconstructing our very own selves, right? In our fever pitch to rebel. It's all deconstruction. So another movie I wanted to mention, not very on point, but King Kong Skull Island, right? The most recent King Kong movie.
Yes, I did see that, and I noticed a lot of the cryptozoology and the kind of Fortean conspiracy stuff. But what did you seem to be hinting at more here?
Yeah, the main thing I noticed is that they refer to a secret government agency, and that it was established to conduct cryptozoological research, right? And that organization was called Monarch.
Ah, okay, I didn't notice that.
Yeah, and then there's a character in the movie named Mason, and she refers to herself as being an anti-war photographer, which of course means she's being biased, right, in what she's doing there. And then for whatever reason, there was a lot of talk about Hollow Earth in that movie. And in fact, if I may, Jay, I implore you, please moderate a debate between a flat earther and a hollow earther. That's just something I want to hear. I think I had a mini stroke just thinking about it.
That's hilarious. I've been saying and declaring on Twitter and Instagram that I'm a fat earther, PHAT, fat earth. So that just basically means that Earth's got it where it counts. That's the kind of that's the Earth. That's the Earth that I'm convinced of. I can't stand this stuff. I can't stand certainly I would say Hollow Earth is more credible than flat Earth, but Hollow Earth, at least, there's a weird section in Plato in the Phaedo where Socrates makes these weird claims about higher dimensions and that the Earth is hollow. And I didn't notice that until a couple years ago when I read the actual dialogue. And then when you go to like Stanford, different sites that have the dialogue online, that section is not. It's at the end. It's not there. But I have an older copy of the dialogues, and if you read the bottom last few pages of the dialogue, Phaedo, Socrates is going into that. He talks about the color spectrum having more colors than we can see, which is fascinating because how in the world would Socrates have known that a long time ago? I don't know. I have no answer to that. But unless there is some kind of secret knowledge that he had access to or something like that. But he talks about, if I recall, he says there are giant crystals and caverns that humans have not, that they've forgotten about, that you can access, climb down into and which is possible because actually, they're constantly discovering giant cave networks. I don't live too far from one of the world's largest cave networks, which I went to with my girlfriend a couple weeks ago in Kentucky. Just massive, thousands and thousands of miles of underground caves. I toured just a small part of it, but yeah, it's very possible that there's a lot of giant caverns or something, but I just can't really see the rest of this stuff being. Can't do flat Earth, and it's not because I've investigated. I've listened to a lot of the debates. Chris had so much more patience to debate these people. I couldn't debate it, but let me ask you. So, what you mentioned in passing the jacket, and this movie has been in my mind, the back of my mind, for a long time. I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times. What do you make of the jacket? Because it does have a psychiatric institute. It has him kind of, he's completely lost time. He's experienced lost time. He thinks he's gone back in time. It appears he has. What do you make of this movie?
Yeah, and that's what makes that movie so much more abstract, is that he most certainly appears to literally be traveling time, but they don't get very detailed about what he's been put through, except that he is being treated with electroshock therapy, being placed in a very primitive form of sensory deprivation by being placed inside of dissection rooms, you know, those drawers that they have where they put the dead bodies. He's being placed in those overnight in a straitjacket after receiving his treatments, and that's basically the
autopsy room.
Autopsy, thank you very much. Yes. So, you know, they don't get very detailed besides that he's definitely undergoing supposed psychiatric care and electroshock therapy, sensory deprivation, and whether, well, yeah, the movie puts it as if he's traveling through time, but obviously the point is that he's becoming so extremely disassociated that he literally just may have become other people, or who knows what, because at some point he goes to visit the psychiatrist, the doctor that did all that to him, when the psychiatrist was by now an older man, and he's pretty shocked to look at a person who looks exactly like his former patient, who incidentally had disappeared, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then at one point he attempts to pass himself off as his uncle or whatever, because obviously people are recognizing him. So he's like, well, I just look a lot like him. But yeah, that movie is very premised upon this exact concept.
Well, yeah, Ewan Cameron says that he claims that he could do that. He claimed that he could re-imprint the people and make them think that it was different time frames and stuff like that. So that's something he claimed. I can't think of trying to remember. John C. Lilly's book is so unreadable. He may talk about reworking people's sense of time, but it does seem credible, because in the bad LSD experiences I had, or even in the ones that weren't necessarily bad trips, you do have a complete distortion of time. At one point in my bad trip, it seemed like things were actually going in reverse.
Wow.
For a certain amount of time, which that's part of the reason it freaked me out, because I was like, I didn't know I was in for this. This is like,
right,
you know, way beyond what I expected. But butterfly effect. What do you think of this one? Because what's weird about this one is that he seems to be traumatized from if I recall, he sees an alternate reality where there's child abuse.
Right.
And I'm trying to remember, is that actually his life, or just a different version of events if he had not blown up the mailbox or something? Isn't that what it is?
It's been quite a while. I don't remember precisely, but I do remember that he has a childhood friend whose dad is molesting her, and he is very keen on getting it on video, right? So you have child porn right there. And from what I recall, when he goes into these alternate states, then he is attempting to cause change, right?
Yeah, I think he's trying to help people in those situations. So he's like rectifying wrong situations.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't recall very much about it, but
no,
it is
okay.
The premise is the same basic idea, which is trauma and disassociation.
Exactly, and I had there's a lot about that movie I've forgotten, but people were asking about that, and you have a similar idea in Jacob's Ladder, because the Tim Robbins character, which is interesting, because you think that it's all about MKUltra, and it does seem to be, but then the end of the film is actually that he's at the point of death, if you recall. So it's almost like, you're thinking the entire time that it's just about his bad trips, but actually he's confronting demonic entities before he goes into, you know, some kind of heaven or paradise or something like that. So it's almost like the end of the movie ends up being his descent from some kind of hell or Hades, you know, to heaven of some kind.
Yeah, and that movie also is very upfront about what the situation is.
In terms of it being MKUltra?
In terms of the premise, right? Even though it's played out in a very, very abstract way, right? With him seeing visions. Well, guess what? Visions of demonic type activity.
Exactly.
There it is again.
There has to be the people who, you know, have interviewed these soldiers and people that have been through this. They have to all be aware of this. That, you know, why is it that they're not seeing bozo, they're not seeing unicorns, they're not interacting with flying Bill Cosbys, they're interacting with demons? Why are they seeing demons? Is it, oh, it's just because we have in our psyche the idea that there's demons? And no, it's not like that. It's not. I mean, I was just looking at some site that somebody sent me of a collection of accounts of people that have done DMT. I've never done DMT, so I don't really know what that's like, but everybody says, oh, you like have the out-of-body experience and you see numbers and forms and planes, and there's always entities. There's always clockwork elves, and there's always the light people, and there's, I mean, listen to this. This is a collection of people's experiences here. I actually saved it. The names of these demons and planes that people feel like they have experienced on DMT. They've experienced a hyperslap, hyperspace. It's the in between. So I don't know, maybe they were watching Stranger Things or something. They've encountered light beings, archangels, machine elves, the mother goddess, the 50 fairies. And no, this is not
70 virgins.
I was going to say 50. So insert your gay joke here for meeting the 50 fairies.
Ew.
You know, right? The 70 virgins. Dream wizards. So this is somebody who's a metal fan, and they were playing their Yngwie Malmsteen, and the Dream Wizard came. Dream Wizard. They were playing Halloween. Elemental spirits, aliens, ascended masters. Obviously, you gotta have the ascended masters in there. The guide, the dream teacher, the conductor, the tormentor. All right, these are obviously demons. A high priest, the soul, the surgeons of the soul, world eaters, legion. And these are accounts, collected accounts of people's, you know, this is what I experienced when I did DMD. The succubus, I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Well, I mean, why are you experiencing all these different demons? And then one last point, I know I've talked a lot, but, you know, I made this point when I was on that goofy comedy show, and people were like trying to argue about atheism versus shaman. No, they were trying to argue for shamanism. And I was like, this is just demonic stuff. And they're kind of taking issue with that. And I'm saying, look, if you read Eliada's famous treatise on shamanism, this is like the classic academic treatise on the history of shamanic practices world over. They're all experiencing the same things. They all go through the ritual of the shaman exits his body, and the entities dismember you in the spirit realm. And a lot of times they eat you and they vomit you back up. I'm not kidding. This is a pattern in shamanic practice. And then you come back with your spirit guide after the demonic process, after this demonic ritual spirit process. So I don't think it's crazy to say that I think that's real. I think your spirit experiences these things, and you do go through a kind of ritual on the spiritual plane. And these kinds of things can become attached to you. That's why these religions then go on to practice the very things that God's law condemns. What do you think?
There's something I wanted to point out in kind of a very clunky way, because I don't remember it word for word, but I do know that the man who conducted the university DMT experiments, right? He's a Buddhist, and he was so disturbed by the results that he literally had to take a styled sabbatical and move out of the country for a while
Wow.
to try to figure things out. Because as a Buddhist, he thought the, whatever you want to call it, the other realm was where your personality would sort of just deconstruct, right? That there was there was no concrete overarching reality, okay? And when the DMT trippers came back reporting so many similar experiences, he did not know how to deal with that fact in terms of his worldview. And so as an academic, he was responsible for actually the university level DMT experiments, but on a personal level, it really shook his worldview to recognize that these people were actually interacting with an overarching reality. He did not, that his worldview told him should not have been there.
Exactly. Everybody should watch that BBC guy who foolishly went through like all these different tribes' rituals. It was a series, Bruce Perry, BBC. You can find him on YouTube. And just watch him going through all these experiences. And he talks about how awful it is, how torturous it is, how miserable he was, how he's, vomiting for days after this experience. And, he's like, everything at the time seemed demonic, but I don't believe in demons, so I don't know what to make of it. I guess it was just all in my mind. Well, no, maybe it's actually demonic. I mean, why is this not, a possible explanation for what you're going through? And then it's, again, like we talked about at the beginning of this conversation, our paradigms will condition our belief systems, the way that we interpret experiences and evidence, right? So Bruce Perry, the BBC correspondent, is committed to the idea that, well, I can't really believe in objective good and evil and demons, so I have to say, well, this is some kind of, psychological manifestation.
Yeah, BBC. Are you aware of Darren Brown?
Yes, it's funny you said that. I was going to bring up his example of the woman who believes in voodoo. Do you remember that one?
I don't, but I do remember one where he, if it's all legit, he literally does mind control.
He does the mind control, yes.
Into pulling the trigger. And, if it had been a real gun with real ammo, he would have actually committed murder and then not realized it.
Yes.
Incidentally, let me back up and make a couple points. So if it seems incredulous to you, if it seems difficult to understand how a person could take a drug, act in a way that they would normally not act, and then the next day have no recollection of it, I'll just point out that a lot of people call that the last time they got drunk. Right?
Yeah, this is a great point. That the times in my life that I've seen people really go wild like that and almost seems like they're not home is they were either completely drunk or they were on like, especially when people get they do like the SSRIs and then they get drunk, they really lose it. Or even when they take the really strong sleep aids, like the prescription sleep aids. There have been countless cases of people, they don't know what they're doing, and then they go and they do these things, drive their car off into the water, or they like run down the street naked, and they've been on the prescription sleep aids and they have no recollection of this. And I think, yeah, that's real. I've seen people do these kinds of things. I've had people fairly close to me had similar weird experiences like this.
And I mean, that's just a very basic, simple, low-level example of what we're talking about. So when you turn that, when you weaponize that, in other terms, is that you would get a person into that state and then implant that which you will, a code word or some kind of mission.
Yes.
Like the next day, they have absolutely no idea, and then you can call them up by whatever means, and so suddenly trigger this overarching template of actions they're supposed to take. In fact, it reminds me of the movie Inception.
Yes.
Okay, a lot of people talked about, oh, it's a movie about dreams within dreams and lucid dreaming, and okay, well, that was kind of just the how they plotted the movie, right? But the real concept behind the movie is to implant an idea into a person at such a deep fundamental level that they think it's their own idea and they act on it.
Good point.
Yeah, that's really what's behind that. In fact, you know what? You mentioned the New Atheists earlier, and way back in the day when they were in vogue, I termed something the DH meme. That's for Dennett, Hitchens, Dawkins, Harris, right? And this is one statement that Daniel Dennett made. I would love to invent a memorable catchphrase or term that would rise unbidden in the minds when they caught themselves doing it. And then they would think, oh, this is one of those cosmic shifts that Dennett and Dawkins and Harris and Hitchens are talking about. Oh, right. And they think this is somehow illicit, just to create a little more awareness in them of what a strange thing it is that they are doing. Okay, and that's kind of a clunky way to explain this is what he is talking about. He is talking about some kind of memorable catchphrase or term, and that when you would hear one of these guys say it, you would start to question your ridiculous theism, because these really smart guys have clued you in on the fact that you don't have to fall for that kind of thing. If I may put words across
when I was talking to Brett from School Sucks, he asked me something like, do you think social justice warriors are connected to MKUltra? And I thought that was a great question, because maybe not directly, but indirectly, yes, because the process of the brainwashing that we're talking about, that is at times in the military senses maybe applied to individuals, is through the pop culture applied to everybody, and then also through the public education. So in a way, everybody is being put through what you're talking about. Everybody is being given these kinds of trigger words, and they think through memes on the internet or whatever that, well, I'm an atheist because I came to this through my rational, investigative, mega superpowers of reason. And it's really because they have been given these ideas through, constant YouTube videos or whatever means. But that's interesting that he actually said that. I was not aware of that. You mentioned Darren Brown. There's 2 episodes where he does the mind control thing. There's the one with the woman in the red dress as the trigger to shoot. There's also one where he uses video games to, well, it's not directly video games, but there's a video game that's set up in a restaurant. If this is legit, it could all be actors. I don't know. It's hard to tell, but so he has this thing set up, and this Arab dude comes in and starts playing a video game where you shoot zombies. A light flashes, and it supposedly, because he's more susceptible to being put in hypnotic state, he goes into a hypnotic state, and they move him into a warehouse across the street where the warehouse is set up just like the video game, and he has a gun, and then he wakes up, and people are walking around in zombies. It's not a real gun. It's like a pop gun or something.
Right.
So this Arab dude is just like freaking out, thinking he's shooting zombies in a warehouse.
Wow.
And yeah, and in it, they supposedly put him back out of that state, and then they wheel him back to the video game place, and they put him up and wake him up, and he doesn't supposedly remember that he just went through thinking that he was shooting zombies. In his mind, he probably fell asleep or something. But yeah, hard to say how real that is. But there's also another interesting Darren Brown clip where he's with this woman who believes in voodoo, and this is merely, I'm not saying that I don't think there's any occult, but the reason that clip is good is that it illustrates, if it's real, that the power of belief systems. So the woman thinks that Darren Brown has voodoo skills, and she gives him her wedding ring. And he says, I'm going to use my voodoo skills to wrap your throat and then your mouth, and you can't speak. And so supposedly this woman is like so freaked out and then she thinks that the doll has her wedding ring. And so she's going through this process and freaking out and thinks that it's actually happening to her. And he says, after all this, he says, here's the doll. I never even put the ring on the doll. He said, the ring was in my pocket the whole time. Illustrating that her belief that somebody's ring being, touching a voodoo doll gave him this power over her was so strong at least if we accept it on face value. Her belief in this was so strong that it kind of even conditioned the way her body reacted.
Wow.
And it's a great, if it's true, it's a great example of
Right.
how strong our paradigms can condition the way that we interpret evidence. And so when he showed her that he never even put the wedding ring on the voodoo doll, her whole paradigm was like, so you never had power over me? I recommend that one.
And that reminds me of James the Amazing Randi, who back in, I believe it was the 70s, he had a guy pretend to be a New Age guru.
Mm.
And a lot of people started following, fell for it, and then they came out and said, look, the whole thing was a put on. This is totally fake. But there were still people who refused to believe that it was fake and followed a guy who admitted that it was just all a fake.
Oh, wow. That's interesting, because Netflix has been doing a lot of these. I can't stand Netflix, but they've been doing a lot of these atheist, or not atheist, occult exposés, which is interesting because this seems to be a big talking point now, is that it's cool to talk about cults, to analyze cults, criticize cults, which is fine. I think that's great, but I wonder if it isn't being done to direct people to the atheistic stuff, and then the atheistic stuff is a halfway house to direct people over into something darker.
You know what? That leads me. Let me back up one step and mention something. So I was coaching soccer. I think the kids were 11 years old. And one of them was drawing something on the mud with a stick. And it was a triangle with an eye in it. And the kids were like, oh, what are you drawing? He says, it's an Illuminati pyramid. And I'm thinking, wow, 11 years old. I mean, these kids are getting information much earlier on in life through access to the internet than certainly I ever got.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm more on point to what you were saying about Darren Brown and the video game issue. Is one of the kids, okay, this is soccer, okay? So we're in a beautiful grass field on a beautiful, clear, sunny day in the great outdoors. And this kid tells me, I'm always thinking about video games. So I said, well, what do you like to play? And he said, I don't know video games that much, but something about Black Ops. Okay, now I don't know much about that video game,
Mm-hmm.
but I do know it is about the government, secret government experiments pertaining to mind control. And so that I'm thinking, okay, this kid is out here in the great outdoors on a beautiful sunny day, on a green grass and blue sky, and in his mind, he's a first-person shooter. That's what he's thinking about.
Yes.
Okay, now what would it take for this kid to end up on the news? You know, most kids are on hardcore pharmaceuticals. Most kids live in broken homes where they're borderline what I would call functional sociopaths in terms of that. The dysfunction in which they live has essentially forced them to not develop deep emotional ties because they know that mommy and daddy's latest sex partner du jour will come and go, and it'll come the next one. So it's a multifaceted situation. But I wanted to circle back and then go in a direction that might seem unrelated, but it's not. So basically, to get back to why we're discussing fiction in combination with something factual, and that is something I've talked about. One time I lectured on multiverse theory, and I gave some examples of movies and TV shows that touch upon the concept of the multiverse. And I said, look, I don't know how many average people would read peer-reviewed science journal papers on multiverse theory, but I know tons of people who are ready to accept it because they've seen it in so many movies and TV shows, right?
Exactly.
And so this is a concept which in academe is known as normative fiction. And so I would say, maybe purposefully or not, it is the issue of you being confronted so often with a concept that it makes it easier for you to accept it because you've seen it fictionalized. Okay, so also a peer-reviewed science journal paper isn't as captivating as when you find yourself in a movie theater in a low-level form of sensory deprivation, right? Your eyes have only one thing to focus upon, and it's a gigantic screen. Your ears have one thing to listen to, and that's the audio track. And you're totally taken in by this very realistic portrayal, which is fictional, but ultimately would proceed forth from a person's real world view. So if I may give an example, I remember talking to my friend about how I have a whole philosophy about the philosophy behind the TV show Seinfeld. Okay, so and my friend said, well, that's strange because Seinfeld himself has stated that they purposefully did not put any morals into that show. And I said, well, there you go.
Right.
It's like the old Rush song says, if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're purposefully setting out to not put morals into your show, that is the worldview that you're putting into it. And so Seinfeld was always referred to as a show about nothing, right? Now, I never understood how is it any more or less about nothing than any other sitcom. But the fact is there's a philosophy called nihilism, and nihil means nothing. And that tells it to you right there, because the whole show is about people who see no transcendence. There's nothing in their lives beyond the immediate. And so this is why they got constantly involved in any little drama they could, because that, and this is actually true of atheism at large, they were seeking subjective meaning in an objectively meaningless universe. And
Absolutely.
So, I remember Elaine comes into the apartment one day and tells Jerry, I can't keep coming in here poring over the excruciating minutia of every single daily event. But that's why they did it, because they had nothing else. And then one time Elaine's telling Jerry how it's so wonderful her new boyfriend and her agree that they don't ever want to have kids. And Jerry says, oh, a sterile existence that ends when you die? And yeah, I mean, that was the point. That was their existence. And let me read you a quote here from one of the little stand-up routines that they showed at the beginning of the show. Jerry says, don't you hate to be continued on TV? It's horrible when you sense the to be continued coming. You know, you're watching the show, you enjoy the story, there's like 5 minutes left, and suddenly you realize, hey, they can't make it. Timmy's stuck in the well. There's no way they can wrap this up in 5 minutes. I mean, the whole reason you watch a TV show is because it ends. If I want a long, boring story with no point to it, I have my life. A comedian can't do that. See, I can't go, a man walks into a bar with a pig under his arm. Can you come back next week? So there you have it. I mean, these obvious admissions that this is the premise. It's nihilism. This is why those characters acted that way. And as far as I can tell, that the show The Big Bang Theory is basically the modern version of a Seinfeld, which begins literally by the whole universe just happened into existence. And this is why the characters on that show are supposedly very young and very smart, and they're very unethical because they see nothing more to life than chasing women while they're brilliant scientists on top of it. And
this is
so I would say that, yeah, go ahead.
Well, no, I think you're right. I think this is the thing we often miss is that the promotion of new atheism, of the new atheists, this push, all of this media attention that they give, a lot of people think that it's there, just like the drug culture, for their freedom, for their liberation. And when you look at, this is why we're talking about this, when you look at social engineering and how think tanks and big academic entities look at all this stuff, they're not interested in your liberation. They're interested in control. And they're also interested in ways of controlling you through what you think is liberation. And if you heard the debate that I did with J.F. Gariapi, the French biologist / nihilist, he laid out very clearly his fairly consistent nihilism worldview. And he's like, yeah, because I am a strict adherent to nihilism, there's no objective logic that I have to adhere to in a debate. So from my vantage point, it felt like, well, at that point, the debate was over. I had won the debate. But there's a more illustrative aspect that you're hitting on, that the pop culture itself reveals the nihilism that eventually comes through, which is just the logical step. So it's ironic because you can't escape logic. Even if you take this dark path, you're still adhering to what's more logically consistent over time. Oh, I might be 18 and I accept Ayn Rand and atheism because I thought it sounded cool and empowering and free. But then I didn't realize that actually there's no reason for me to do X over Y. There's no reason for me to be, quote, moral over immoral. There's no reason not to commit suicide, as Camus said, right? So being more consistent in his nihilism. I know that it was a work of literature, but still many atheists and nihilists do go suicidal. As you said, they're on the drugs. And, you know, what's bizarre to me is the multiverse is kind of this reinterjection of a way for materialists to have mysticism. And I'm not saying that from, I mean, here's Brian. Here's Brian.
I'm sorry. I'm just going to interrupt for just 1 second, because in my lecture, I refer to it as the atheist supernatural realm.
There you go. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And you're not wrong to say that. I've got two of the top materialists who write on multiple dimensions, Lisa Randall and Brian Greene. Now they also advocate for the multiverse, which I actually thought their multiple dimension books were interesting. But now, now this takes us into how unicorns actually are real, because there's a mystical universe somewhere where the unicorns are real. By the way, I think as Chris made this point, or somebody, I forget who, but if this is true, then there's also a universe where God exists. I mean,
I said that in my lecture as well.
Okay, so
yeah, exactly. They just prove God's existence.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I mean, so this is mysticism and the supernatural for the materialists. And I think here's the key here, is that this breakdown may not have been a lot of humans that were conscious of this overall plan. I think that Satan very, very much was. The plan was to break down man's identity, as we talked about at the beginning, even down to gender and what makes him up psychosexually and so forth, body too. And then give man a new narrative where he thinks he's his own God, that he can piece together his new identity like Voltron or something, like he can put together a new being for him to be and inhabit in a surrogate body or a transhumanist body or a virtual reality or whatever. That's where we're at. So that's why every one of these stages, the atheist stage to the nihilist stage to the transhumanist stage, it's all the alchemical process that you laid out at the very beginning. And by the way, Arthur Koestler says it's alchemy, and he was a high-level illuminist, and he says the end of Ghost in the Machine, what we're doing is alchemy.
Ghost in the Machine, a book or the anime?
Well, actually, I've seen the old anime movie a long time ago, and then I watched the Scarlett Johansson one, but it was basically just The Matrix meets Blade Runner. But it did, did show all the transhumanist stuff. But Kessler was a Royal Society guy, Hungarian Marxist, who I think expatriated to London, and they made him a Order of the Royal Knights of Bologna, or whatever the title is that they give. And so he wrote all these books, some of them kind of half science, some of them literature. But he's the guy that did the 13th tribe, right? Which is weird, because it almost seems like he knew that to go to the higher levels, he would have to, in a way, undermine any kind of biblical religion, including the possibility that there is such a thing as Hebrew. And I think that's kind of what the point of 13th tribe was. Not that he really cared about, because he was a Hungarian Jew who then became this Marxist, who then became this Illuminist, and hence his like rising in the ranks to being, you know, super high level Royal Society, whatever he is. So then he writes 13th Tribe, says, oh, Jews are just Ashkenazi, Turkish tribe. There's no such thing as Hebrew people or Sephardic, whatever his thesis is in the book, which most people, I don't think, believe that book anymore. But it almost seemed like he was having to deny his previous existence to be led up the atheist chain. And then he got to the Illuminist chain, where in the book he actually says cannibalism is a natural practice, which is interesting because we just saw Richard Dawkins say that very thing 2 weeks ago. We need to remove our taboos on cannibalism. So I've been thinking for a long time. I can't really prove it, but I actually think some of these new atheists are actually being either promoted by Luciferians behind them, or they're secretly consciously Luciferian and they're just pretending like they're atheists and kind of spilling the beans a little bit over time, like Dawkins saying, we need to remove our taboos on eating people. But Kessler says that openly. He says, yeah, nothing wrong with eating people. That's how we evolved.
Right.
We had to eat people to evolve. There's no other way.
Okay, if I may, I'm going to go through a few points.
Before
yes.
Before we, so I guess we're going to come here near the end, and I want to remind, we got to a good 220 live audience here. If you have a question for me or for True Free Thinker, and again, the website is truefreethinker.com. You can check out his work. I'll have his videos and stuff listed below. But if you have questions, I will split the super chat proceeds. Now's the time to do it as we come to the end. So go ahead.
Okay, in that case, I'm going to just plow through a few things if you don't mind. So we're moving
Sure.
essentially, the way I view it is normative fiction. I'll give you an example. I wrote a very short dystopic fictional story where I invent that there was some news report about how the Giza pyramids were just discovered to actually be octahedrons. Whatever, okay? A friend of mine read that and he says, wow, I wonder if they really are octahedrons. And I thought, wow, this is way too easy. I mean, I just made that up off the top of my head, but I got this guy in real life thinking, hey, I wonder if that really is the case. So it just gives you an example of normative fiction, which in my mind moves into predictive programming. Let me read you a statement by Bill Maher, who was talking about the TSA's failures and terrorism. He says, I always say, if you want to know what's going to happen, watch movies from 20 years ago. Everything that happens in a movie is going to happen.
But Bill Maher said that?
Yes.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Every now and then he has moments of lucidity, if I may refer to it as such. Yeah. Now let me take you in another direction really quickly.
Sure.
Who would you say for decades now has been the poster boy for the alien phenomena?
The poster boy for alien phenomena. In fiction or like real alien quote researchers?
Real life, yeah, real life.
Oh, I don't know, somebody like what's that guy's name? Stanton Friedman, or one of the like George Gorey, or somebody like that, or what do you mean?
Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. I'm thinking Whitley Strieber.
Oh, yes, obvious one. Thank you. Yeah.
And interestingly enough,
Communion, and that kind of kicked off the modern radio obsession with. Yeah. Okay. Good point. I forgot about.
Yeah, Whitley. And here you have, incidentally, you have a guy who started out as a fiction writer. Right. He authored numerous fictional books.
Yeah, exactly. I remember reading 2012, A Ride at 2012 by Whitley Strieber, not because I had a guy who was always trying to debate me on stuff, and he's like, well, he's a real Southern guy, and he was a big Whitley Strieber fan. He was like, I'll only argue with you about the aliens if you agree to read 2012. And I'm like, this is a really bad fiction book. What is this supposed to convince me of? Like, I'm not going to believe in aliens because I read his 2012 book. But this guy was just convinced that aliens existed, exactly to your point, because of all the fiction.
Right. So let me point out something that's definitely odd. Whitley Strieber has certainly been the poster boy for alien contact for many decades now, and the fact is he has never claimed to be in contact with aliens.
Is that true? Really?
Yes, he calls them visitors.
What does he say about communion? I thought he presented that as his like personal story or whatever, and then Christopher Walken plays Whitley Strieber.
Walken. Okay, sorry.
Walken, all right, so the aliens are coming down.
Okay, so
messing with my posterior.
This is not off topic. This is just a huge circumlocution. So Whitley Strieber's experiences with the visitors begin in his meditation room. Okay, he has a meditation room in his in his New York estate. And incidentally, Billy Meyer is also a alien contactee, supposedly, going back to the 70s. And his experiences began when he was living in an ashram in India. So Strieber, I sort of considered him, you'll get a kick out of this, I consider him the Bertrand Russell of the alien experience, because he has floated so many theories about what could possibly be happening to him. And again, I don't want to put the word alien in his mouth because he does not do so. He calls them visitors. His first impression is that they were demons.
Okay.
Okay, now Jeffrey Kripal, you know that name?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay, Jeffrey Kripal is a professor at Rice University, and he's possessed. And when I say he's possessed, that's not my opinion. I am quoting him. He states that of himself. He is possessed. He said he went to India, got involved with some Hindu rituals, and became possessed by Kali.
Wow. And
he in turn relates a story about Grant Morrison, the famous comic book author and artist.
And Grant Morrison is a Crowleyan who is a big proponent of chaos magic, if I recall.
Right, yes. Grant Morrison went to India, got involved in tantric rituals, and became possessed. And so now your children can go to a Comic-Con where you think they're checking out comic books about superheroes, and they can end up listening to a lecture by Grant Morrison telling them to get involved in Crowleyan magic. Isn't that wonderful?
Now this, yes. In fact, real quick, let me add a quick story. I have a buddy who draws comics, and I did not know about this stuff, but saw it firsthand back in about 2006, where he was taking his art to one of the big conventions, I think in Chicago, and I went with him, and it was this was the first year. I don't know if they still do this. I haven't been to any kind of, I don't keep up with comic conventions and whatnot, but my friend had been drawing for a long time and was just on the verge of going pro. So it was a big deal. And not only was it the first year that they featured a giant retinue of porn stars, yes, a giant retinue of porn stars at the comic book convention, which blew me away. I was like, what in the world? It was also where they featured speakers on ritual magic. And I kept one of the brochures because I couldn't believe it.
But the fact is that this is normal. This is the stuff of which fantasy literature and comic books were made. Okay, so Jeffrey Kripal wrote a very fascinating book called Mutants and Mystics, very much along the lines of Christopher Nolan's Our Gods Wear Spandex. And what they talk about is that essentially virtually every single author of early golden era fantasy and comic books was either mentally unstable, hooked on drugs, or into the occult, or a combination of any two or three of those down the line. Okay, so Kripal takes issue with people that, these dumb Christians that claim that Whitley Strieber is involved in some kind of occultism or demonism. But the fact is that was Strieber's very first self-assessment of what was happening to him.
Interesting.
Okay, now, yeah. Now, as I listened to Strieber, every now and then I would note that he made reference of his family's ties to the military and that he had friends in the CIA. Okay, and that was one of those things where I'm going to make a little mental folder and keep that in there for future reference. And then one day he does this whole talk just coming straight out and saying that, yes, I was MKUltra experimented upon, starting from early days where he underwent Skinner box treatment. If you know that term, it's basically a form
B.F. Skinner.
of, yes, a form of sensory deprivation where you literally stick a child inside of a box and close it.
Wow.
And so Strieber has been extremely blunt and upfront about the fact that that's what he sees now as having happened to him. Now, the issue becomes that there is a video, you can certainly find it on YouTube, although I wouldn't know exactly the terms. You might want to put in interview with an alien or something. And it's a supposed video of a military base, and they had an alien that lived there for a while. And wouldn't you know it, unfortunately, the only time they got interview with an alien, I think it might be called, the only time they got him on video, by golly, the alien ends up dying right there on camera. It's really traumatic. Anyhow, and so I have that on my channel, by the way, with the commentary that I'm about to make, which is that Strieber was consulted by a documentary that touched upon that, and they stated that Strieber was so distraught he did not want to appear on camera. But what he said about the alien is that if it's a fake, then whoever made it knows how they move, okay? The thing is, it's an obvious puppet.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it is just so obviously a puppet. And I'm thinking, okay, wait a minute. Now, this thing is obviously just a... The thing is so obviously a puppet. And here Strieber is saying that if it is not real, then whoever made it knows how they, the visitors, move. So I'm thinking, wow, okay, so obviously while Strieber was undergoing these mind control experiments, they trotted out this puppet and made him think that he was interacting with some kind of multi-dimensional being, or who knows what he thinks of them at this point. You see what I mean?
Yes, I
see. He was
this is funny.
Made...
Okay, because you're hitting on something that a couple of my friends and I have discussed in the last year or two, is there's got to be a tie-in between MKUltra and the UFO phenomenon. And I've been saying, I think it's a great way you could fool a lot of people by using the drugs and making them think that all this stuff is aliens, right? And it actually, if they're on drugs, it could be that they are interacting with something. Yes, but you can also manipulate it too and make them think that, like you see in X-Files with the Cassandra Spender character, where she's like, I've been chosen, they've chosen me, which is what a lot of the contactees think, that, oh, the entities have chosen me, I'm the special one to bring the new world religion to the masses.
And that is part of the point. So let me finish up on Strieber really quick. Sure. So to my mind, it's very clear. Strieber was made to think that he was interacting with these beings when he was just basically being drugged and hypnotized and interacting with a puppet. All right, it's very plain to me. But he, in essence, refuses to think that that's all it was, okay? Admitting that he has undergone, he specifically uses the term Skinner and also MKUltra. But
Mhm.
he still believes that he has actually had real life interaction with whatever these beings are, because he says on days when he would have these experiences with the beings, people who saw him that day, whenever it was, would point out to him that he seemed really distraught on those occasions. So he thinks, okay, no, it really happened to me, and that's why I was distraught. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, well, buddy, you were distraught because you were undergoing mind control experiments, right? I mean, I'm taking a sort of,
Mhm.
and it's a little difficult to draw the line, right, between the physical manipulation of a mind and
Yes.
the
Right.
spiritual implications that we've been talking about. And I'll give you another example. I actually wrote a book called 50 Shades of Gray Aliens. Okay, and in there I give a lot. Yeah,
This is not your 50 Shades of Grey fan fiction.
no. 50 Shades of Gray Aliens, yeah. And I give a ton of background on the Whitley Strieber situation or scenario. One thing I mentioned in there is about Jesse Ventura's show Conspiracy Theory. They had an episode on Skinwalker Ranch, and Sean Stone is on that episode. And when they're at Skinwalker Ranch, he is kind of quiet, kind of looking down with his eyes closed at night. And somebody says, Sean, what are you doing? And he says, I'm calling the spirits. I'm thinking, wait a minute. The show is about aliens and UFOs. Why is Sean Stone calling on spirits? I mean, I understand the connection, but within the context of the show, somebody should have said, what on earth are you talking about? We're supposed to be dealing with aliens and UFOs.
I'll have to
And,
ask Sean about that, see what he says.
yeah, and then another portion of the show, on the way to Skinwalker Ranch, they're supposedly receiving messages from aliens through the car radio, and they're saying, evil, so evil. It's like, well, wait a minute. What are aliens communicating with you, telling you something is evil, so evil, and then he's calling on spirits? What is the connection?
Are you calling me a liar?
Hey, yeah, you know, I remember the last time you did a Jesse Ventura
I coughed.
impersonation. It took you like 5 minutes to recover.
I did. You know, true free thinkers are atheists. It's hard because it starts turning into the Ultimate Warrior, and you start wanting to go, oh yeah.
Actually, I do have the clip from that episode on my YouTube channel also. But what I can tell you about it, maybe we can keep going on this alien theme for a minute.
Well, I do want to, but the problem is I've got another stream that I have to hop on.
Okay, yeah. So let's take some questions and end it that way.
And then we can continue, because this whole alien aspect of it could be its own show. I'd like to.
It very well could.
Maybe we can touch on that on another stream. But
one last.
Sure.
Very fast point is, if you're really wondering about the correlation between aliens and MKUltra, check out Martin Cannon. Martin Cannon, his book, The Controllers, A New Hypothesis of Alien Abductions. And that's his whole entire point.
Oh, wow.
I actually have that whole book posted on my website, because it's around the internet in e-form. It's from 1996, so I would love to see an update. But that is his point. He reviews some of what was then the known mind-controlled technologies, and he says the whole entire UFO alien phenomena can be explained that way.
Wow. Okay. Martin Cannon. This has been a great talk. Let's see. We've got, and then here we are having to close when we got our highest audience here of 230. I want to say, yes, I did get the channel back. YouTube did reverse the strike, because obviously the strike was baloney. We weren't harassing anyone, so there was no way to uphold that strike. So that's how I got the channel back, and I'm able to stream today. When you get a strike, you can't stream. They make you penalty box for 30 days or 60 days. So last chance, if anybody has any super chats. Can't believe haven't gotten any yet. No questions. We have a educated interviewee, excuse me, here. True free thinker, truefreethinker.com.
Say that 5 times fast.
I can't. His stuff will all be linked below. Check out his site. A lot of work's there. He's got his books available as well. No questions. If not, we're going to close up the stream. I'll give it a couple more minutes. Anything you want to add, that is the best outlet for you, is truefreethinker.com, and you can be followed, I guess, on social media outlets as well, correct? Is that correct?
I'm sorry. I was listening to you speaking to the audience. Did you pose a question to me at the end?
Yeah, I was just saying, is that the best way for anybody to reach you? Is
oh, yes.
I cannot say this word, truefreethinker.com, and then on socials as well.
Yes, I made it user-friendly, so if you go to truefreethinker.com, you'll see a link to anything you might be interested in, from videos to Facebook and Twitter and all the books and all that good stuff.
All right, excellent. Well, no bunch of cheapos, no super chats, bunch of cheapos. It's all right. I'll still hook the True Free Thinker up tonight, even though we had a bunch of cheapos. Thank you for coming on, and we will definitely do a future stream that deals with UFOs and the scam behind UFOs, the spiritual deception involved in UFOs. I have to, anybody listening, I'm right now hopping onto the Bechtloff. If you're familiar with the conservative streamer Bechtloff, he's invited me on, so I'm about to hop over there. Don't know what we're going to talk about. It's going to be a kind of a chill stream, philosophy stream. That'll be in the next 5 minutes. And then definitely go to truefreethinker.com. Check out the works that he has there. A lot of apologetics against atheism, a lot of the stuff that Jay's analysis talks about with pop culture.